The boat drifted into the wall of fog so thick it felt like sailing through wet stone, and for a moment I wondered if the ocean itself was trying to push me back. Every wave carried a strange rhythm, as if something deep below was knocking, steady and slow. The air smelled like metal and old ash, growing sharper the closer I came to the distant column rising through the haze. I kept watching that thread of smoke, thin but relentless, cutting upward in a stray with the wind. It made no sense, just like the silence around me. Even the gulls vanished. When the fog split open, I finally saw the shore. Black sand, broken trees, and a single trail leading inland. But before I could anchor, the water beneath the hull shuddered, as if something enormous was moving below. That was the moment I realized the island wasn't waiting. It was listening. The boat nudged the shore with a soft crunch, and the black sand felt strange under my boots, almost warm despite the cold air rolling off the water. Every step inland made the silence heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. A narrow path carved through toppled trunks led deeper into the island, but nothing showed signs of life. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind. The smoke rising beyond the ridge pulsed like a heartbeat, each wave of color shifting from gray to a soft amber glow. I kept walking, drawn forward even as the stillness pressed against my ears. The ground trembled once, faintly, like the island was shifting beneath its own weight. Whatever waited ahead didn't feel natural, and the deeper I went, the more I felt I wasn't approaching a place. I was approaching something that had been waiting. The forest felt tighter with every step, branches stretching overhead like ribs closing in around me. The smell of burnt wood grew stronger, mixing with the damp scent of moss. Strange markings appeared on rocks along the path. Sharp cuts, deliberate, forming patterns that didn't match any language I knew. I paused, listening, trying to catch any hint of movement, but the soundlessness felt absolute. My heartbeat became the only rhythm, echoing against the quiet. The smoke pulsed again, stronger this time, sending a faint vibration through the ground like a warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody had walked this path before me recently, and whatever they were chasing had not wanted to be found. Farther along the trail, the trees began to thin, replaced by rusted metal poles rising from the ground like forgotten bones. A cracked fence wrapped around an open clearing. Its wires snapped in several places as if something had pushed through from inside. Beyond it stood the remains of a small structure. Half-collapsed walls, scattered equipment, and a sign so faded I could only make out a few letters. The air shifted here, warmer, carrying the faint hum of something mechanical hidden beneath layers of decay. I moved cautiously, feeling the weight of old stories pressing around me. Whatever happened here hadn't been an accident, and the island's silence suddenly felt less empty and more watchful. I stepped inside what remained of the structure, and the air felt even warmer, almost breathing. A metal locker lay overturned, its contents scattered. Paper scraps stuck together by humidity. Warped notebooks. A broken radio with wires spilling out like veins. One page caught my eye, the ink smeared, but still readable enough to make my stomach tighten. A hand-sketched map of the island, marked with a red circle around the source of the smoke. And below it, a word written twice, heavy and deliberate. I didn't recognize it, but the way it was underlined made my pulse quicken. Outside, something rustled, slow and deliberate, like a footstep dragging across dirt. I froze, listening, realizing the silence was no longer empty. Something else was here. The jungle shifted as I moved past the ruined structure, the air turning thicker, heavier, almost sticky with warmth rising from the ground. The path dipped into a narrow gorge where the trees arched overhead, their branches twisted like they'd grown under tension instead of sunlight. The hum I'd heard earlier returned, deeper now, pulsing through the soil with a slow, steady rhythm that felt almost alive. Every step echoed strangely, as if the earth beneath me was hollow or carved out by something long gone. The smoke rising beyond the ridge brightened again, flashing orange before fading back to gray, and the light washed briefly across the gorge walls, revealing scratches carved into stone, long, curved, and fresh. My breath caught. Something had passed through here not long ago, something heavy enough to drag its weight across the rocks, yet careful enough to leave no footprints. The silence tightened around me until even my heartbeat felt too loud, and I realized the island wasn't hiding its secrets anymore. It was leading me toward them. The gorge opened into a wide basin where the ground sloped downward in a perfect curve, almost too smooth to be natural. Warm air drifted upward from thin cracks in the earth, carrying a faint metallic scent that coated the back of my throat. The hum I'd been following deepened, vibrating through my legs like a slow heartbeat, buried far below. As I moved carefully across the basin, the light shifted. The smoke on the ridge brightened again, casting a soft copper glow across the stone. The glow revealed something lying near the center of the hollow, a fragment of fabric caught on a jagged rock, weathered but unmistakably human-made. I reached for it, feeling the silence swell around me. The island wasn't just old. It held memories, traces of someone who had stood exactly where I stood now, and whatever they found here had marked the land in ways I didn't yet understand. I tucked the fabric into my pocket and continued toward the far end of the basin, where the earth sloped upward into a narrow passage. The hum grew louder here, almost a low chant that rose and fell in steady waves. As I approached the passage, the ground beneath me shifted, not violently, just enough to make the rocks tremble, as if the island exhaled beneath my feet. The air warmed again, brushing against my skin like heated breath. The smoke above flashed brighter than before, sending shadows sliding along the stone walls. I paused, listening. A faint pattern of sound drifted from ahead, something that could have been wind, but the air was still. It almost sounded like a voice carried through stone, muffled, distant, calling from someplace I wasn't sure I wanted to find. The passage tightened around me, narrowing until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The hum deepened into a steady rumble that I felt more than heard, each vibration carrying a warmth that seeped through my clothes. The walls here were smoother, curved in a way that suggested tools, not time, had shaped them. A faint light flickered ahead, soft, warm, shifting like reflections off water. My pulse climbed as I pushed through the final gap and stepped into a hidden chamber carved beneath the ridge. Pools of shimmering liquid filled cracks in the floor, reflecting the pulsing smoke above like molten glass. Something had been built here, something deliberate, and the air felt thick with traces of people who had stood at this spot with intentions far heavier than mine. At the chamber's center, the hum steadied into a single tone that felt almost intentional, like a signal waiting for an answer. Strange markings covered the walls, curving around the chamber in spiraling lines that converged at a raised stone platform near the middle. I approached slowly, feeling the heat intensify with each step. On top of the platform lay a metal device, half buried in dust and coated in corrosion, but unmistakably built with precision. It pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm in the ground. For a moment I hesitated, knowing this was more than evidence. It was a warning left behind. The air tightened around me, as though the island itself held its breath. When I reached out to touch the device, a ripple of warmth rolled across the chamber, and the tone beneath my feet shifted, almost like a response. The moment my fingers brushed the metal, the chamber shuddered, as though the island had taken a sudden breath. A warm pulse rolled up my arm, not painful but startling, like touching something alive. The hum beneath my feet rose into a steady vibration, shaking dust from the walls in soft cascades. The pools of liquid brightened, glowing with a molten shimmer that rippled outward toward the passage I'd come through. For a moment, I thought I saw movement inside the reflections, shapes darting like shadows beneath water. I stepped back, pulse racing, unsure if I'd awakened something or merely responded to a signal waiting for years. Above me, the smoke column flared brighter than ever, sending new light spilling through cracks in the ceiling. Whatever the device was, it hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting for someone to touch it again. The vibration slowly faded, leaving only a faint, lingering warmth in the air. I stepped carefully around the platform, studying the spiraling lines carved into the stone. They formed a path toward a narrow opening I hadn't noticed before, an exit leading deeper underground. It was barely more than a slit, but warm air drifted from it in steady pulses, each wave matching the rhythm of the device behind me. I hesitated at the threshold, sensing the weight of whatever lay beyond. The island felt different now, less like a place, and more like a living thing shifting beneath its own skin. I could almost feel its attention turning inward, pulling me with it. The smoke above dimmed again, as if bracing itself. I swallowed hard, set my hand against the warm stone, and stepped into the tightening darkness. The passage narrowed until my shoulders scraped the walls, each breath echoing in tight, uneven rhythms. The floor sloped downward, guiding me into a cavern where the hum transformed into a steady throb like a buried engine. The heat intensified, clinging to my skin in thick layers. When the passage opened, I found myself standing in a vast hollow beneath the island's ridge, an enormous subterranean vault. Pillars of stone rose from the ground like the ribs of a giant creature, each one marked with more of those curved symbols. The air shimmered with warmth, distorting the walls into wavering shapes. I could hear something deeper inside, a faint, metallic ticking like gears turning after a long sleep. Whatever had been built here wasn't just hidden. It had been protected. I followed the ticking through the vault until I reached a section where the stone gave way to metal. A structure partially buried in rock, its surface weathered but unmistakably manufactured. Pipes snaked along the walls, some cracked, others still radiating warmth. A circular door stood half open, wedged by fallen debris. Light flickered faintly inside. My throat tightened as I stepped closer, realizing I was looking at the remains of a research station, one far older than the ruins on the surface. The metal groaned as the heat shifted, echoing through the chamber like distant breaths. As I touched the doorframe, a faint voice crackled from inside, distorted, broken, but undeniably human. I froze. Someone had been here, and maybe still was. I slipped through the doorway, stepping into a narrow corridor lined with equipment fused into the walls by heat. The air inside felt different, stale, heavy, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years. Flickering lights cast broken shadows across the floor. A shattered monitor lay on its side, still blinking with faint green text. I knelt to read it, but before I could make out the words, a sharp clang echoed deeper inside the structure, followed by a dragging sound that chilled the warmth right out of the air. The noise repeated, slow and heavy, moving closer. I rose to my feet, heart pounding as the lights flickered again. Someone, or something, was in the darkness ahead, and it wasn't trying to hide. The dragging sound moved steadily through the corridor, slow enough to make every second stretch, but heavy enough to make the metal floor vibrate beneath my boots. I backed toward a junction where the walls widened, trying to stay quiet, but every breath seemed too loud in the stale air. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, the entire hallway went dark. In that instant, the dragging stopped. Silence fell so sharply it felt carved into the air. When the lights blinked back on, something had changed. The dust on the floor ahead of me showed a fresh streak, as if something massive had been pulled through moments earlier. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stepped closer and crouched to inspect the marks. The air around them felt warmer, fresher, almost as if someone had just passed. I rose slowly, realizing the deeper I went, the less abandoned this place felt. I followed the disturbance deeper into the structure, each step echoing through metal ribs that lined the walls. The hum from the chamber behind me faded, replaced by a faint mechanical whirring that seemed to originate from everywhere at once. Loose panels creaked overhead, reacting to shifts I couldn't see. The narrow passage opened into a wider room, filled with old terminals arranged in a circular pattern, all dark except for one flickering screen. Its dim glow pulsed weakly, like a heartbeat. Papers lay scattered across the floor, some melted into the metal by heat. I approached the terminal, my steps cautious. A single line of text blinked on the cracked display, half complete, half corrupted. Before I could decipher it, something metallic clicked behind me, soft yet deliberate, freezing me mid-step. Thought. I turned slowly, bracing myself, but the room behind me was empty. At least at first glance. The click sounded again, this time from a vent near the floor. A faint glow pulsed inside it, shifting like a dying ember. I approached cautiously, crouching to peer inside. The vent was deeper than it looked, a narrow tunnel descending beneath the research station. Warm air billowed through it in slow breaths, carrying a scent that felt strangely familiar. Burnt metal, damp stone, and something else I couldn't place. A soft thud echoed from the tunnel's depths, followed by a faint scrape. I backed away, realizing whatever had been dragged across the corridor wasn't still. It was moving, slowly, purposefully, towards someplace deeper underground where the island's pulse felt strongest. The vent wasn't an option. I needed a path I could actually fit through. I scanned the room and noticed a heavy steel door halfway buried under fallen beams. A faint vibration pulsed through the metal, as if something beyond it was still active. I cleared debris piece by piece, each movement echoing in the hollow chamber. When enough of the door was visible, I gripped the latch and pulled. It resisted, then groaned open with a burst of warm air that carried the same rhythm I'd felt in the chamber above. A staircase spiraled downward, carved partly from stone and partly from reinforced metal. The smoke outside must have been rising from whatever lay below. With a deep breath, I stepped onto the first stair, the heat rising around me like an invitation I wasn't sure I should accept. The stairwell tightened as I descended, the air growing hotter with each step until sweat rolled freely down my neck. The rhythmic pulse of heat grew louder, echoing through the metal and stone like a distant drum beat. By the time I reached the bottom, the space opened into a circular chamber filled with twisting pipes and thick cables vanishing into the floor. A massive mechanism dominated the center, rusted, silent, yet radiating a steady warmth. Symbols etched across its surface matched those in the upper chambers. As I stepped closer, a faint sound rose from beneath the machine. A weak but unmistakable voice, muffled as though trapped behind layers of metal. My breath caught. Someone was alive down here, and they weren't alone. The voice beneath the machine was faint, almost swallowed by the heat pulsing through the chamber, but it carried a desperate edge that pierced straight through the thick, humid air. I circled the mechanism, searching for any opening, any panel, any sign of how deep it went. The metal was warm enough to sting my fingertips when I brushed its surface. Pipes vibrated with each pulse, rattling softly like a breath trapped behind steel. I finally spotted a narrow maintenance hatch near the floor, half concealed beneath cables. Dust coated its edges, but the latch looked disturbed, as if someone else had opened it not long ago. The voice rose again, weak, strained, and I felt a jolt of urgency. Whatever was inside that machine wasn't a recording. Someone was alive, and they were running out of time. I tugged the hatch open, the metal burning my palms even through my sleeve. A rush of hot air burst out, carrying the smell of scorched wires and something older, stale, recycled air that told me whatever was inside had been sealed for years. A ladder descended into darkness, lit only by the occasional spark from frayed cables. The voice echoed up the shaft again, closer this time, fragile, but unmistakably human. I hesitated, running through every possible danger. Collapsing metal, toxic fumes, the unknown pulse shaking the chamber. But hesitation felt worse than the heat biting my skin. I gripped the ladder and started down, each rung vibrating under my hands as though the machine itself responded to my movement. The deeper I climbed, the more I realized this wasn't just a machine. It was a prison. The air grew cooler as I descended, the heat fading into a dry stillness that felt even more unsettling. The shaft widened into a cramped maintenance room lined with consoles long since dead. A single emergency light flickered weakly overhead, barely illuminating the space. I stepped off the ladder and turned toward the sound. There, slumped against a panel, was a figure, too still, too quiet. For a heartbeat, I thought they were gone. But then their chest rose with a faint, trembling breath. Their clothes were torn, skin pale beneath layers of grime, eyes half open but unfocused. They tried to speak, but only managed to rasp. I knelt beside them, and as their gaze found mine, something in their eyes shifted, recognition. Weak, but real. They knew I wasn't the first to come looking. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a struggle pulled through grit and pain. She tried to lift her hand, but couldn't, so I steadied it gently. Her lips moved again, forming a single word I could barely make out. Stop. I leaned closer, trying to hear more, but her voice collapsed into a hoarse whisper swallowed by the hum of distant machinery. She shook her head weakly, eyes pleading, as if warning me of something larger than the chamber, larger than the machine above us. I scanned the room for water, tools, anything that could help, but everything was rusted, broken, or fused into the walls. The only way to save her was to get her out, but the machine's pulse shifted again, faster now, echoing down the shaft like a rising heartbeat. Time was running out for both of us. I pulled her weight gently over my shoulder, feeling how weak she truly was. Every step toward the ladder felt tense, the air thickening again as the machine above shifted with a deeper, more urgent rhythm. Mara tried to speak once more, her voice cracking with effort. Not alone, she whispered, her fingers clutching at my sleeve with sudden strength before falling limp again. A chill crawled up my spine. Not alone down here. Or not alone on the island? I didn't have time to ask. A metallic groan rippled through the chamber, followed by a distant crash that shook dust from the ceiling. Whatever had been moving earlier in the vents was awake again, and this time it wasn't dragging itself away. It was coming closer. The chamber shook again, harder this time, nearly throwing me off balance as I tightened my grip on Mara. The emergency light flickered violently, plunging the room into stutters of darkness. The sound in the corridor behind us grew clearer. No longer a slow drag, but a steady, uneven stride, like metal scraping stone in short, deliberate bursts. I shifted Mara's weight and stepped toward the ladder, but a surge of heat rose from the mechanism above, washing through the shaft like a warning. Mara stirred weakly, lifting her head just long enough to whisper a single word that made my stomach twist. Run. Her voice carried a fear deeper than pain. The island's pulse thundered beneath my feet, faster than before, and the shadow at the corridor's edge stretched long across the floor, reaching toward us like something alive. I hoisted Mara onto my back and climbed the ladder with one hand, each rung vibrating as if the machine itself resented my escape. Her weak breath warmed the back of my neck, urging me upward as the sounds below grew louder. Metal clanging, scraping, something heavy striking the walls. Heat surged up the shaft, rolling over my legs as though the machine was exhaling in shallow bursts. Halfway up, a deep metallic bellow echoed from the depths, a sound that didn't belong to any machine or animal I knew. I forced myself higher, heart pounding, hands burning on the hot metal. The edge of the hatch finally came into reach, glowing faint orange from the chamber above. I pulled us through just as another violent tremor shook the entire shaft, sealing whatever was below us in a storm of echoes. We emerged into the upper chamber, just as the ground lurched sideways, sending me crashing to one knee, while shielding Mara. The glowing pools along the floor flared bright white for an instant before settling back into molten gold. The spiraling markings on the walls pulsed in rapid patterns, almost like they were transmitting a message. I dragged us toward the exit passage, each step heavier than the last, as if the chamber resisted letting us go. The hum that had once seemed distant now pierced the air like a warning alarm. Behind us, a metal scream tore up the shaft, a violent shredding sound, and the temperature spiked so fast it stole my breath. Whatever was rising from below wasn't just following. It was breaking through. The moment we reached the narrow passage leading back toward the surface, the walls contracted with a groaning rumble, dust raining down in thick clouds. I squeezed us through, forcing Mara ahead while bracing myself against the hot stone. The island shook with every distant impact, responding like a living creature trying to contain what it could no longer hold. The passage felt longer than before, twisting in ways I didn't remember, as if the island itself was rearranging beneath us. A sudden blast of heat roared through the tunnel, knocking me forward and smothering the air with choking steam. I pulled Mara close, covering her face as we pushed onward. The smoke outside must have been reacting too. Every pulse inside the ridge mirrored something happening above ground. Whatever waited at the surface, we had to reach it first. The passage finally opened into the gorge, where I'd first seen the strange markings carved into the rock. Bright daylight stabbed my eyes after the darkness below, but the relief vanished instantly. The smoke rising above the ridge had changed. No longer a thin column, it now churned in violent spirals, swirling upward like a storm pulled from the earth itself. The ground rumbled beneath us, sending pebbles skittering down the path. Mara's breathing quickened. She clutched my arm, whispering something I could barely hear. It woke up. I held her steady as the wind shifted, drawing hot air out of the gorge in a rushing draft. Whatever we'd escaped wasn't contained anymore. The island throbbed with rising energy, and we were standing directly in its path. The wind howled through the gorge as the spiraling smoke thickened, twisting itself into a towering column that cracked with bursts of orange light. I tightened my grip on Mara, guiding her toward the black sand shoreline as the ground trembled with growing fury. Every step felt heavier, as though the island was trying to hold us in place. Mara kept whispering broken warnings, each word more desperate than the last. Ahead, the trees bent in the wrong direction, pulled inward toward the ridge instead of pushed back by the wind. The air thinned, carrying a deep rhythmic beat that felt like standing beside the heart of something waking up after years of forced sleep. I could feel it now, pulsing through the ground, through the air, through my chest. Whatever was rising beneath the island wasn't a machine, and it wasn't human. It was something meant to stay buried. We reached the edge of the forest, just as another violent tremor split the ground behind us, sending a shockwave through the trees. The shoreline was in sight, but the ocean churned in spirals that mirrored the smoke above, waves spinning in slow, unnatural circles that defied the wind. Mara's knees buckled, and I caught her before she fell completely, lowering her onto a patch of solid sand. Her breathing came in short gasps, each one a painful struggle. She lifted her hand weakly, pointing toward the ridge. "It's not done," she whispered. I followed her gaze and saw the smoke compressing inward, condensing into something dense, deliberate, and impossibly bright. A sound like metal bending under immense weight echoed across the island. The final stage of whatever this was had begun. A deep crack thundered through the sky, splitting the spiral of smoke as a brilliant column of light erupted from the ridge. The island roared, a sound so loud it drowned out the ocean, the wind, even my own heartbeat. Mara shielded her face as I pulled her behind a fallen trunk. The light grew stronger, almost solid, pouring upward like a blazing signal. The ground beneath us convulsed, sending jagged fractures racing toward the shore. I clung to Mara as the earth heaved again, nearly tossing us into the surf. The column pulsed once. Then again, each burst brighter than the last. She grabbed my sleeve, her voice a trembling whisper. If it reaches full cycle, we can't be here. I didn't know what full cycle meant, but I knew we had seconds, not minutes. I lifted Mara into my arms, adrenaline drowning out the pain in my shoulders as I pushed toward the waterline. The boat was still there, rocking violently against the waves but intact. The roaring light behind us grew in intensity, casting our shadows long across the sand. Mara tried to speak, but her voice collapsed into a cough. I could feel the heat from the ridge even here, washing across the shore like a furnace blast. The ocean swirled in massive spirals, surging inward rather than out. I fought the current dragging against my legs as I carried her toward the boat. Behind us, the ridge cracked open, sending a burst of molten energy tearing into the sky. I didn't look back again. Survival demanded forward motion, nothing else. I heaved Mara into the boat and shoved off with all the strength I had left. The current resisted at first, tugging the hull back toward the island like a grasping hand. Then a shockwave exploded outward from the ridge, blasting the sea in a massive surge that pushed us violently away from shore. I held Mara close as the boat pitched and rolled, barely staying upright as waves crashed over the sides. The island shrank behind us, swallowed by spiraling smoke and blinding bursts of light. One final eruption tore through the ridge, sending a geyser of molten fire into the sky before collapsing into silence. The smoke thinned almost instantly, fading as though it had never been there at all. The island settled, quiet again, too quiet. And as we drifted into calmer waters, I realized the danger wasn't gone. It had simply been released.